Great. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. First item on the agenda today is the approval of minutes from March 20th to 26th. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, those are approved. Next item is the overview of the enacted 26-27 state budget.
So good morning, everybody. Just so folks know, I'll be walking you through this one pager that has very tiny print. Hence the one page. So the budget was, state budget for 26-27 was finally enacted a little bit later than usual, but we do have a budget. I'm going to start with our state operations budget. And just to take a step back, the ILS budget is included in a couple different budget bills. That includes the state operations budget, the aid to localities budget bill, as well as there's a portion of funding that we disperse that's in the judiciary and legislative budget bill. And then there are implications for our agency in one of what they call the Article 7 or policy bills, the Transportation Economic Development and Environmental Conservation bill, which is euphemistically called the TAG bill. So I'll just walk through very quickly. Burton's going to go into more details on the most relevant portions of these bills when he talks about our proposed allocation plan. So my overview will be a somewhat quick overview. I'll start with the state appropriations. ILS requested $8.8 million for state appropriations, and that is what we got in the final enacted budget. State appropriations is what funds our office and pays our staff salaries. This funding doesn't give us any additional positions. It keeps our current staffing pattern whole as it is, and also allows for some tenure-based salary increases that we've talked to you about in the past. We are in the process of asking the Division of Budget for permission to transfer from the aid to localities statewide funding some funding to fund 2 additional positions, Regional Immigration Assistance Center Coordinator, as well as a Public Information Officer. This was in our proposal to you last September. We do not yet have that authorization from DOB, and we continue to press, prioritizing the Regional Immigration Assistance Center Coordinator. The aid to localities appropriation bill, that is what we disperse to counties. So that is the core of the work that we do at ILS. And that bill is, Burton will talk a little bit more about, that's essentially, set forth in 4 different programs. The first is the Indigent Legal Services Program. That's what funds our distributions, some of our competitive grants, as well as our upstate quality improvement grant. This funding can be used both for criminal defense and family court representation. Now, the budget makes it look like there's an appropriation of $90.9 million, but actually only $81 million is a real appropriation. 9.9 is a dry appropriation, meaning that if there's funding via the federal Title IV program that we can claim, that we can tap into that funding. We do not anticipate being able to claim any of that funding for the aid to localities. The next program is a statewide implementation of Harrell hearing reforms, and that's $273.97 million. That's what we requested in our budget request, and so we were glad to see that fully funded once again in the final enacted budget. The ACP rate increase, this is the $92 million that has been appropriated to ILS so that we can reimburse counties 50% of the expenditures that they incur as a result of the increase in the hourly rate for assigned counsel attorneys that took effect in 2023. So once again, the state fully funded that at $92 million. I should say that to date, every county in New York City has been taking advantage of that. And we've got a really streamlined process set forth to make sure that those claims are paid out quickly. The final one is the Article 18B Family Court Representation. And this is, as you know, historically where ILS has been advocating for more state funding to do in family court representation what state funding has been doing in criminal defense representation. And as we've talked about in the past, we have calculated or estimated that to do in family court, what we're doing in criminal court would be $150 million per year. And we proposed that that be phased in over 3 years. So our budget request this year was for $50 million. The executive budget proposed $25 million. The final enacted budget includes $30 million. The good news is that this is $5 million more than last year's final enacted budget. So while it's not the full 50 million that we requested, we are glad to see that there's a steady increase in the amount of family court, in the amount of funding, state funding for family court representation. So Burton will talk about how we plan on using that funding. The other bill that has implications for ILS is the Judiciary and Legislative Legislator bill, in which there's $47 million appropriated each year with the ability to transfer the funding to ILS so that we can disperse it. And this is for caseload relief for the 6 trial level providers in New York City, a program that's been in place for about a little over 10 years now. The last part of the final enacted budget is the TED bill, and that's the part of the final enacted budget that includes authorization for fund transfers. And unfortunately, once again, it does authorize a transfer of $234 million from the ILS fund to the general fund. We're disappointed to see that. We've explained before that we consider 114 million of that to be legitimate in the sense that it's attached and relevant to the work that we do. That's what pays for the reimbursement to counties in New York City for the expenditures that they incur for the assigned counsel rate increase. But 120 million of that has no discernible public defense related purpose. And so we were hoping to see that fund transfer reduced to 114 million. So that's the bad news, that it's there. I should say the good news is, however, is that transfer authority has been in the last 3 final enacted budgets. And to date, the state has not taken full advantage of it. They've really transferred only the amount that they need to cover the reimbursements to counties in New York City for the rate increase. And so this past fiscal year, they transferred 83.2 million, not the full 234 million. So even though we're disappointed to see that language in the final enacted budget, we continue to work with the state on being careful about using that transfer authority, and by careful, I mean using it consistent with the purpose of the ILS fund. So any questions before I turn it over to Burton to talk about our proposed plan for dispersing this funding to counties into New York City?
I guess, is there anything to look at there? I mean, is it right in litigation or something? Because Iowa had a similar issue a couple of years ago, and they threatened litigation and they came to some sort of agreement, settlements. So, I mean, can you do something about that?
I know that that's been explored. I think there's a meaning. I think that the issue is that there's a meaningful, significant difference between the 2 funds. The Iowa fund is and I think that was their leverage for threatening litigation, and unfortunately, we don't have that same leverage.
It's not clear to me also that an agency of the state can sue the state.
Interesting capture.
I think that's happened on the federal level.
I know, yeah. Say.
There's a lot of things that happen.
I think we wouldn't want to establish. No. I mean, that's the other option. issue too, is we're not in a position to do that. And I could say that, there's been some other people that have talked about doing that, but because of the differences in the funds, they're just not. Yeah.
I have a question, and this is just a matter of curiosity, but so this gives, if they're using the money that's swept for assigned council, the fees in the counties, is it a matter of appearance or is there something substantive happening that they prefer to have it come from them rather than ILS?
It's, yeah, that's a really good question, one that we asked ourselves. We think that the reason that they do it that way, so basically what you're seeing is in our final enacted budget, the 92 million for the rate increase is actually coming from the general fund, not from the ILS fund. And then they sort of compensate for it through the fund transfer. We think there's a couple of reasons they do that. One, because the fund transfer amount not only includes that 92 million, but also funding that goes to Office of Court Administration for the Attorney for the Child program, which also experienced the same rate increase. And the Indigent Legal Services Fund statute does allow for payments to OCA for the Attorney for the Child program, so that's legitimate. So we think that's the primary reason that they do it. They may have other reasons, but it's for them. I think it's just fiscally a little bit more manageable.
A quick question, I don't know if it's better for you or Burton when he gets there, but on the ACP rate increase to 92 million, I'm really happy to hear you say all the counties have put in dollars on that. Where do we stand in drawing down on the 92 appropriation during the fiscal year? Using up the entire thing? Are we, what percentage of it are we utilizing?
About 2/3?
Yeah, I think about 2/3.
About 2/3.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, not yet at the point where the 92 million seems insufficient.
Okay.
So, and that's, again, that is with all of the counties and New York City submitting for reimbursement every single quarter that they're.
And your perception from the counties, I'm assuming, is that the submissions they're making every quarter represent the whole university DB vouchers they have out there?
Other than any remaining vouchers that include work that was done prior to April 1st, 2023, which is increasingly
Should be
smaller and smaller.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
I think this coming year will be a good bellwether year for us to say, now we're at that point where the vouchers generally should not include, time prior to, yeah. In which case then I think we'll get a good sense of. I'm confident the 92 million is enough. I'm always thinking about, is there a way that we can argue for the counties getting even more than 50% reimbursement? I mean, our view on that is.
Tell me what you need me to do.
Okay. The next document we're going to look at, I believe, is attachment 3 of the packet. This is the allocation plan. So in other words, how we are recommending that we use this year's appropriations that Patricia just walked through. Last year was a very complicated allocation plan that we asked the board to consider. And I believe last year I promised this year would be a simpler plan. And yet somehow this document went from 5 pages to 6 pages plus a chart. Now, it is both true that it is a simpler plan as well as a longer document. And I'll explain a little bit what's going into the length this year. The primary purpose of this document is to allow the board to exercise its responsibility under Executive Law 833 to approve an allocation of our funds. But we've really come to appreciate that this document serves a very important purpose, not just for the board, but for the counties, for the public defense providers, for ILS staff, and for some of our partners in government, like the Division of Budget, to have a clear understanding of how we intend to use our funding. And it's not just about how the funding will be used, but we've, I think, increasingly appreciated the practical implications that come from these decisions. For every grant that we issue, there are downstream impacts on stakeholders that ultimately affect implementation and speak to our mission of improving quality of public defense representation. So in crafting this year's allocation plan, we've been very intentional to provide very clear descriptions in this document of the 4 programs that Patricia spoke about. We provide status updates on all current grant contracts within each program, whether or not we are recommending any allocation decisions that are associated with those grants. We are trying to clearly signal the need for and the timing of upcoming contracting actions that the counties and providers, as well as ILS, will need to be cognizant of. And to try to better communicate this, and this was at Patricia's suggestion, which I think was a phenomenal one, creating this chart, which is on the very last page, to provide a more accessible visualization of the narrative. So the 6 pages of the narrative really do distill down to this chart, which I'll walk through in just a little bit. Actually, in looking at the chart, if you want to turn to that quickly, I will just note now this chart accounts for every newly appropriated dollar in this year's budget for the 3 programs under which we issued grant contracts. The $92 million for the rate increase reimbursement does not appear here because that is pure reimbursement. But the ILS program, the statewide implementation program, and the family court program, we issued grants for all of these. In the allocation status column, the highlighted cells that say new are the funding decisions that we're going to ask you to vote on today. These are either new contracts, extended contracts, or additional funding. And again, I'll talk about all of those in more detail in just a little bit. Where the allocation status is a plain white cell that says allocated, those are decisions that do not require action from the board, either in the case of, for example, $40 million that goes out of the Indigent Legal Services program to New York City. That is by statute. So there's no decision, there's no real discretion there. By statute, that money goes to New York City. And where prior year allocation decisions by the board have obligated funding that are part of current contracts, there's no decision to be made for the board because we've already made the decision to enter into multi-year contracts with the counties. So I'll talk in a little bit about those new allocation decisions. Before I get to that, I want to talk about kind of a central theme of this year's allocation plan. And again, part of why the document's a little bit longer this year. There's a preamble about the theme of contract consolidation. Now, contract consolidation, that phrase may not set your hearts aflutter, but it's something that's, Chris, I was going to say, you might be the exception. But it does for me. This has been a bit of a passion project of mine since I've joined ILS. Very quickly, I'll share a quick anecdote. My very first week at ILS, Patricia, you asked me, I think we were preparing for a meeting with Monroe County. And you asked me to just put together an overview of the current contracts and ILS funding that was available for Monroe County. And that was my first experience in taking a look at all of the different contracts that Monroe had with us, where it was in the contract period, how much funding they had on each contract. And my head almost exploded. I had not gone to law school to do that much math. And so since then, I've said, maybe there's a better way. And I really want to credit Patricia because I've had her full backing and support on this in terms of seeing the need for going down this road of contract consolidation. You'll meet Jamie Blair in just a moment, but I credit him and his team, the grants unit, for also helping with both the vision and the execution of this project. And we wanted to talk about it in this year's allocation plan because we've already taken some steps in this direction. But I thought it was very important, and we wanted to make sure that we were clearly articulating why we're making these recommendations, why we've taken the steps that we have to date, and where we think we're headed in the future. As I note as we note in the documents, as recently as 2023, there were some counties that had as many as 10 separate ILS grant contracts with us. And I would say most had 6 or 7 contracts. There's a number of very valid and well-intentioned reasons why that situation, arose. But we as an agency really recognized that it was becoming an issue for us as well as for the counties and the public defense providers. and that we were finally well-positioned to address that. And, just quickly, I'll say that, as we make these decisions about allocation of funding, for every grant that we issue, there are a number of steps that we as an agency have to undertake. And Jamie knows all of this. In addition to needing the budget to pass optimally in a timely fashion, we need the board to act on an allocation plan. For each grant that we issue, we need to go to the Division of Budget to get spending approval. We have to go to the Office of State Comptroller to get procurement record approval. In other words, to get approval for the manner in which we intend to disperse the funding. We've got to work with the counties to notify them of the impending contracts and contracting actions. And then for each individual contract within each of those grants, we have ILS program staff that have to negotiate the budgets and work plans with the counties and the providers. There's a whole internal approval process for those. The grants unit has to build the contracts, send them out to the counties. There's a local contract approval process and then local budgeting processes that need to occur so that the provider offices have the funding they need from the counties to be able to spend the money so that they can seek reimbursement from ILS. And then we need to get the signed and notarized contracts back from the county. And even at that point, we still have to go to the Office of Attorney General and back to the Comptroller's office to get final execution over those contracts. You can repeat a lot of those steps every time we have to amend a contract. And so once the contract's in place, again, these are cost reimbursement contracts. So the counties are submitting claims to us on a quarterly basis. So that county that has 10 separate contracts with us will need to then submit a total of 40 reimbursement claims at a minimum to us in a single year. And that's work that they need to do on the county side, and it's work that we need to do on the ILS side to process all of those claims. So for each contract that a county has, there's a multiplier effect that impacts ILS, it impacts the counties, it impacts the provider offices. And that really has increased work for what are really resource-stretched offices across the state, counties, the providers, and frankly, ILS as well. And over time, that leads to delays in issuing contracts, executing contracts, and that ultimately delays implementation of the programs that we're trying to fund here. On top of that, again, because of the way that we've rolled out funding in the past, some of our contracts had inconsistent contract lengths. They had inconsistent starting and end dates where many contracts did not necessarily align with the local fiscal years. That made it very challenging for the local budgeting process, which again can delay implementation. And then with so many contracts, it just becomes easy for there to be inconsistencies across those contracts that lead to either counties underclaiming or inadvertently maybe overclaiming because there's confusion about which contract certain expenditures are to be claimed against. All of that also then makes it very difficult for us as an agency to assess the implementation of these programs. So to date, we have taken a number of steps to try to rectify this. We've taken some advantage of natural opportunities to consolidate some of our contracts. For example, the 5 former Burrell Herring counties, which includes Ontario County, of course, during the settlement period had 3 or 4 separate contracts for their criminal defense programs with ILS. And once the settlement period ended, we took advantage of that to consolidate those into single contracts for those 5 counties. We've also developed standardized budget lines for more consistency across budgets. We've started moving contracts where we can to align with local fiscal years. Jamie's going to talk in just a little bit about some of the work that we've done to both re-envision and bolster our grants unit, which is the fiscal backbone of our office. And we've taken a more strategic approach to these allocation plans that we present to you for your approval to ensure that they're aligned with these overarching goals. So I'm going to talk very quickly about where we'd like to head with this. 3 years ago, as I mentioned, we had counties that had up to 10 contracts with us. 3 years from now, in 2029, we are envisioning and working towards each county in New York City having 3 core non-competitive contracts with ILS, one for each of our 3 major programs. A distribution contract that can be used for all public defense, a Harrell Herring statewide implementation contract that can be used for criminal defense, and a quality improvement for family court representation that's specific to family court representation. And just to be very clear, as we're talking about consolidating contracts, this is not in any way reducing the amount of funding that's available to the counties. It is at a minimum continuity of existing funding and more likely finding opportunities to weave additional funding into those 3 core contracts. Each of those core contracts will be 3 years in length with start and end dates that are synchronous with the local fiscal years, and they'll be staggered in such a way that new distribution contract will start in 2027, the new criminal contract will start in 2028, new family court contract will start in 2029, and the cycle will start again in 2030 with a distribution contract, and so on. In addition to those 3 core contracts, counties, of course, may have the opportunity to bid for and receive any competitive grants that we issue, maybe hold regional grants like our Regional Immigration Assistance Center grants, or one-time grants like the Office Professionalization and Modernization grants that we issued last year. So they may have more contracts than just those 3, but the core funding that they receive, and frankly, the lion's share, probably 90% or more of the ILS funding that they receive will be in those 3 core contracts. That's not just something that we see as an efficiency for efficiency's sake. And it's not just to address the anxiety that I had when I first opened up the folder of Monroe County's contracts. This is going to have a materially positive impact on the counties, on the public defense providers, and on the people who are doing the hard work of trying to improve the quality of public defense representation in New York. It's essentially a form of caseload relief for the staff who have to work on contracting and budget negotiations. There will be predictable and stable funding sources for the counties that are aligned with the local fiscal years to assist the counties in the local budgeting process. Each year of that 3-year cycle, only one major contract will need to be negotiated. Right now, with the different start and end dates, county might have 3 or 4 pretty significant contracts in any given year that they need to negotiate with ILS, and they may be at different times of the year. This will ultimately all allow for deeper implementation work, better information sharing across ILS, and better data reporting, both in terms of the data that we receive from the public defense providers in the counties, what we are then able to produce for the state division budget for the board, and to reflect back to the providers in the counties to show the progress that they've made in achieving the goals that we work towards. So as I mentioned, we've already taken several steps towards this goal with the board's backing and prior allocation plans, and this year's plan is going to recommend several significant steps to continue the progress. So with that, I'm going to go back to the chart. I will walk through the chart in terms of explaining what some of the new decision-making is for this year. So I'll start with the ILS program. Again, this is the most flexible of our programs, funding that can be used for both criminal defense and family court representation. 40 million of the 81 million goes to New York City by virtue of statutory authority. We are recommending that a little more than $37 million go to funding a new 3-year distribution contract that is received by all counties in New York City starting January 1st of 2027. That amount reflects the increase to the distribution program that the board approved last year, as well as consolidating the upstate quality improvement and caseload reduction funding that 30 counties currently receive from ILS. So that's a contract that we would be discontinuing at the end of this year, but folding that funding into those counties' next distribution contracts. Additionally, we are recommending close to $3.8 million to fund the first year of a new 3-year Regional Immigration Assistance Center contract. So these are the 6 regional centers that we have that assist public defense attorneys with ensuring that non-citizen clients are receiving the advisance that they need on any potential immigration consequences of their either family court or criminal defense cases. That amount is a slight increase over what we've offered for the regional immigration assistance centers in the past. The other major change that we are recommending this year is that we move away from issuing those on a competitive basis and start to convert those to non-competitive. New York City is already non-competitive because they're the only entity that can hold that region. For the other 5 regions to date, in the 3 REACT contracts that we've done prior to this, they've been competitively issued. We are now at a point where these programs have developed such an expertise, are providing such important services, that we really see the need for continuity of those programs, and believe we can make the case with the Office of State Comptroller for why those should be issued through a single source procurement as opposed to issuing them competitively. The next major program is the Burrell Herring Settlement Statewide Implementation Program. That's the close to $274 million that funds the statewide expansion of the Burrell Herring reforms. All of the counties and New York City currently receive a grant contract under this program. I should say at least one contract under this program. But there are 4 separate timetables for those contracts. So we are trying to get all of the Burrell Herring statewide implementation contracts, again, on the same timeline so that we can issue a new contract starting January 1st, 2028. That would involve this year allocating $25.2 million of the program for a 1-year extension for the 5 former settlement counties whose current contracts expire at December 31st of this year. We're going to seek to extend them through December 31st of 2027. 4 of those 5 counties also receive a supplementary counsel at first appearance contract that also expire at the end of this year. Our recommendation is that we let those contracts expire and fold that funding into the larger settlement implementation contract. So that would be another consolidation move that we would be doing this year. 45 counties have contracts that currently expire on March 31st of 2027. So we are recommending that $115.8 million of this program be used for a 9-month extension of those contracts, again, to get them through December 31st of 2027. That would, again, facilitate us being able to issue a new contract January 1st of 2028. And those are the 2 decisions that need to be made under this program. The other contracts for all the remaining counties are already extended through December 31st, 2027. So everything else will be reconciled with the actions that I just described. Excuse me. Additionally, I do want to note we have earmarked up to $3.25 million to be transferred from this program to our state operations program, as we've done in years past. This is funding that goes to support the operation of our statewide appellate support center, our Western New York Regional Support Center, where Vince is joining us from today, as well as a few of our research team positions. So we would be continuing that funding. And then finally, of the 3 major programs, the Family Court Representation Program. This is the $30 million that was appropriated in this year's budget. Thanks to the actions of the board last year, all counties in New York City now have a non-competitive family court representation contract with ILS. And we have funding in the out years to sustain those contracts. So that is terrific news. That was a major advancement last year. That was part of why last year's was so complicated. But there are 5 separate grants within that program that have varying terms. So we're trying to get all of those contracts eventually extended through December 31st of 2028 so that we can issue a new family court representation contract to each county and New York City in 2029. Now, the decision that needs to be made by the board to help advance that goal has to do with our 3rd family defense grant contracts, which expire December 31st of this year. We are proposing that $3 million of this year's appropriation be used for the first year of a 2-year extension of that contract through December 31st of 2020. Additionally, we have then total of $15 million that is otherwise unallocated from this year's appropriation. Our recommendation is that we use $14 million of that to increase funding on existing family defense contracts in amounts that would range from $200,000 to $1 million a year for the counties that have the greatest demonstrated need for funding to get closer to compliance with our family court representation caseload standard. That's the same metric that we use to initially fund these contracts. So we would continue to use that methodology to add this additional funding to increase funding where it's most needed across the state. Finally, $1 million of this year's appropriation, we are recommending go to a one-year extension for one of our competitive upstate model family representation offices. We have a total of 6 of these grant contracts. 5 of them are on the same schedule where they expire in December of 2028. One of them expires in December of 2027, so we would be seeking to use $1 million to extend that model family representation office contract, which is currently held by Westchester County, to synchronize that with the other model family representation offices so that we can make a more sort of cohesive decision a couple years down the road about the continuity of those contracts. I know I just threw a lot at everybody. Happy to entertain any questions that folks may have.
I have a question.
Sure.
So the upstate model family representation, is that the contract that enables offices to provide representation when people are being investigated but not yet in the court system, or?
Yes, that's correct. Yep.
And for those offices that don't have that, is the funding in these other contracts available for that kind of representation or not yet?
Yes, it is. Okay.
I had a couple of questions. On the family court representation, you said the proposal for the 14 million would be allocated on the basis of need, essentially. Are you taking into account ability to spend it? Or not really?
That's a great question. I would say at this point, the fact that we were able to now have contracts with each of the counties means that every county is already in the position of having the vehicle for the funding in place, which helps facilitate spending, certainly. And we've seen, I think, almost every county take the necessary steps to start implementing. So, I can't speak to every single county and their ability to use all of the funding immediately. But, as we found as we've rolled out funding, both in this program and in the criminal defense representation program, sometimes we need to come to the table with the availability of funding first to start to work with the counties and providers to identify the ways in which they can use that money. And Patricia, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
I think the true another way I think about it as director of ILS is our goal is to make sure every county can spend it, right? So that's our job, is to work with the counties on using the funding available to improve the quality of representation. And yes, we do have some counties that for various reasons face challenges in spending, and it's our job to overcome those challenges, to work with the counties on overcoming those challenges.
On the criminal side, there's some that are maybe reluctant.
Right. Same on the family court side. And sometimes it's a combination of, we still see across the state, public defense not always valued the way that we think it should be valued and the way that frankly it should be valued. And we also see just genuine county specific barriers. And we could say, it's been tempting to sometimes say, I want to write that county off, right? But we can't do that, right? Yeah.
Right, right. What happens, so sorry, for the $14 million, is it allocated on a 1-year contract? Is it allocated on a 3-year? How are we going to do it?
I'm sorry, for the additional.
For the 14, yeah, 3-year?
So it's a combination of funding that is both, portion of it is we know will be recurring funding. Portion of it is funding that at this point in time we have to treat as one-time funding, but we can allocate out over maybe 3 years. So we're going to have to, it's going to be a bit of a mixed formula where some of the funding increases will be sustainable indefinitely based on what we know future, or what we could reasonably assume will continue in terms of appropriations. Some will have to increase for a 3-year period, and in the meantime, work to continue increasing the amount that's appropriated in the state budget process so that we can continue that in the out years beyond 3 years.
And then what happens to unspent monies?
So unspent money, if it's unspent and then the contract ends, the funding that supported it remains in the Indigent Legal Services Fund.
Okay.
We still have the appropriation authority, reappropriation authority for it, so we can, at that point in time, figure out if there is a different use for the funding, or if we want to extend those contracts to allow the counties more time to use the funding.
And would that have to stay within the family representation funding? Yes.
It would, yes, because it's still part of that program.
It could be reallocated to a different county or for different,
That's correct.
yeah, within family. Okay.
Yes.
The, on the statewide implementation, I assume the 129,609 is that large because New York City is in there.
Yes, because that is New York City and then 7 other counties. But yes.
But that's why it's so big,
okay.
okay.
So a question to piggyback on what the judge raised. I think Patricia, you made a good point about counties as an entity sometimes being reluctant to get into these things. And I have admitted before I have trepidations about the representation prior to involvement in family court issues. We've tilted on that before. There's a bigger issue that we're seeing at the local level. I don't know if ILS is getting this too. There's not enough lawyers.
Yeah.
It helped us with the rate increase on the 18B. We raised prices on the panels. I think that's stabilized. But as we look long-term and from a macro perspective, there just aren't enough lawyers willing to do this work. And I think we've kind of bridged ourselves with the 18B rate increase, but we still see a cliff coming. And now we've got a lot of panel members who are toward the tail end of their career. And that's great. They're experienced. They're providing quality representation. I don't mean that disparagingly at all. I mean, I don't know that there's enough folks coming into the system to replace them when they decide they don't want to do it anymore. That gives us a lot of pause at the local level.
Yeah.
And I know we're very fortunate in Ontario County. For our institutional providers, we pay very competitive. So we're okay, but we've got openings where we may get 1 hour or 2, taking people on practice orders and then trying to bring them along. And I think the issue of not being able to spend the money is going to be especially acute in the North Country and the Southern Tier, where there just aren't that many attorneys. I don't know that that's our problem to solve, but it's a very real problem on the ground.
Yeah, it is our problem to solve. But not alone, right? In collaboration with counties, law schools, and New York State Bar Association and other people. We're really well aware of that. And both our family court representation team and our statewide team are working with the providers on strategies for recruitment and retention. And there's a couple strategies that that come to mind very quickly. One is that the providers that have really robust internship programs and hire law graduates are a couple of the providers, even in rural counties, are fully staffed. Livingston County Public Defender is a good example. Steuben Public Defender, they take full advantage of the Cornell Defender Program for internships. They have lawyers now who came to them through that program. So it's an investment in interns and law graduates, but it works. So as the providers are shifting away from only looking at collaterals, and now looking at new lawyers, that is a good strategy. And it helps that we can give them a robust training program, funding for a robust training program. So like in Monroe County, the Monroe County Public Defender Office, I interned there, and they wouldn't offer me a job. Because they're like, we only hire somebody who's been admitted and who has some experience. Now they have a robust internship program to hire law graduates, and they don't take a case until they've been through like a 3-month training program, and this has all been made possible by the funding and the work that we're doing with the counties. I still think there's the other thing too that we really encourage counties to do is use our funding for salary increases where possible.
And as affects elsewhere.
I know, that's the problem. Yeah, and so the counties that are willing to do it has a negative impact on other counties. So that's a solution in combination with other solutions. But I think that's also part of the bigger issue, and one that we really are trying to grapple with as an office, is how do we elevate the status of the public defense function. And so, we do that in various ways. Like I just did a program for the Cornell Defender program yesterday. I just did a training program, 2 training programs, and a lot of it was talking about the importance of public defense. And so we try to look at opportunities to do that. But being able, one thing we also try to encourage providers to recruit nationally, and I think we're well positioned as a state to say, we're one of the few states that you will come to an office with a robust training program and caseload standards and access to the specialized professionals that are necessary for a client-centered team-based approach to representation. So there isn't like one solution, there's just really taking advantage of all these different ideas that people bring to the table.
To elaborate on that a little, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
But one of the things that we used to encounter at the public defender's office was that you couldn't take people who were right out of law school, who were also applying for jobs in other places and could get hired in other places because they couldn't go to court. And even with a practice order, you need a supervising attorney there. So now with the Monmouth County Public Defender's Office, I know that they bring in law graduates and they train them and they give them time to study for the bar. Or time to pass the bar, so they don't, and that's made it so they can hire a lot more. But that was a huge problem over the years.
Yeah. I would be working there.
That would be the only reason that you couldn't, is that they wouldn't.
Exactly.
So the court system is doing one thing and looking into another thing that are helpful, not purely for public defense, but for rural areas generally where there's shortages. The one that we implemented 2 years ago and have ramped up for this year, so this is largely Justice Gary's initiative that she calls Rural Ready. So last summer, the court system essentially paid to place pair 2 law students in each of 4 rural counties to work for the summer, and to then engage them with the local community, make sure that it's almost like a summer associate program you find in a firm for those students. We've increased that from the 8 it was to 32. So it's 8 counties and 4 students in each place for this summer. She wants to increase it beyond that. There are funding challenges, but we're working on that. And we want to get more data to see, are these people some of them staying? Is this effective? Are there different things we could do to make them stay? Is it more effective in some places and others? Why? But where 8 wasn't really going to give us a robust enough, quick enough sample, 32 will. So that's the plan going forward for a couple of years. The other thing that has been pitched to us, and we have thrown it back to say, well, where are you going to get the funding? Do you know how the Pro Bono Scholars program works? So this has been going on for, I'd say, almost a decade. It's a Lichtman creation where a law student can essentially do 2.5 years of law school and then do sort of last 6 months of law school at a not-for-profit, and can practice under a practice order. And you take the bar in February instead of July. So what Judge Gary would like us to do, what the proposal we have, is to create that for essentially for indigent legal defense in rural areas. So it's not there's any sort of pro bono, and it's not confined to rural areas. She'd like to have one that's called Rural Scholars Program with the same sort of thing. The difference is that for the pro bono scholars, they're not paid, right? They're actually paying their law school tuition, right, and then doing the placement. And what she's looking for is a way to fund, even if it's only sort of housing or housing living expenses, something like that, while you're in a rural area doing the 6 months. And so we pitched that back because I think the proposal came somehow with the involvement of UB Law School. We sent it back to them and said, okay, how would you fund this? So because I think we maybe can't or won't fund it, the court system, but we would like to get it funded. And it's a, very viable program, I think, if we can do that, and that would be more targeted. Now, I will say that one or more of my colleagues on the court wonders why this couldn't apply to prosecutors' offices as well.
I'll get that question if it comes here, because they claim to have the same struggle with recruiting.
Yeah. Well, and you do see people, go to these offices and then wind up in public defense, so it may not be the worst thing in the world.
There's also it's a problem that goes beyond public defense to private firms and in our communities, Rochester, Ontario County. And I've been involved with a variety of bar association and other groups trying to increase the interest of attorneys from outside the community and then retention. And one of the things that has happened in a variety of settings that I've seen when I'm working with these committees, and we've all tried to focus on it, is especially with attorneys of color, they may come to a community to work in an office, but then the community or the office itself isn't prepared for the challenges that they have in the community. So for example, we had Black attorneys driving out to these small towns at night who might get stopped by the police or, and they were fearful sometimes and they encountered some of the things in the courts. And it's a huge, how do you challenge the institutional racism? But there was a program that the Monroe County Bar Association started, and it wasn't called a mentorship program, but it's sponsors and I forget what the sponsees are called. And it was specifically designed for attorneys of color to come up and receive that kind of mentoring and guidance and support that a lot of the white attorneys have and that firms and, not-for-profits weren't aware wasn't being provided to the attorneys of color. But it's a huge, broad challenge.
Yeah.
If there's more questions, this is actually something that requires a vote.
Need a motion?
Yeah, the motion is to approve the allocation.
What was that?
Yeah, to approve the allocation. Yeah.
So,
Second.
In favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No? Okay, those are approved. Thank you. Let me get an update on the grants work. Thank you.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Thanks for having me here. Jamie Blair, Assistant Counsel. Try to keep this somewhat brief. I mean, you guys may have some ethics training. Yes. Sure. I do appreciate the opportunity to put a spotlight on the grants team because I think, like Burton said, we're a piece of the puzzle, but I think we're a very important piece of the puzzle. And a lot of this stuff couldn't get done if it wasn't for the grants team. So I really appreciate that. I'm going to start with just my background really briefly to let you know how I got here. I'll talk about the team structure, kind of the teams within the team, and then also just some general projects we're working on. So for myself, I was here in New York City for a while. I worked at the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, ended up as the agency chief contracting officer, which is how I became familiar with ILS, worked with ILS in some of their contracts. In 2018, moved upstate for work and personal reasons and started with ILS. I was on the quality side of that, the programmatic side. Chris, you may remember I was up in Washington County quite a bit as a quality improvement attorney. Then in, I believe it was around 2020, right before COVID, we created the new assistant counsel position, and I was lucky enough to get that to work with Patricia. I think a big part of that was to reduce a backlog of contracts. We had a large backlog, and Patricia did a ton of work on that, and I helped get through that backlog. As part of that, I started managing at that time we called her the manager of grants, solicitation, and distribution, overseeing the grants team. I had experience doing that in New York City, so it was a natural fit for me to do that here. She left in late 2024 for another opportunity, and so I took over the grants team. I will share, and part of my work in New York City too, which I forgot to mention, is I also in that position restructured their grants team. That wasn't by county, it was more by programmatic area. So defense was one of them, community safety, alternatives to incarceration, to create an expertise in those areas and help the programmatic side where needed. So I'm going to pass out our org chart, if you can just pass that around, and then there's some numbers which you guys may appreciate on the back side of that. And I'll go through, there's some highlights on the numbers, I'll go through what those mean in a little bit. So just to start, I think there's 3 core functions in any grants team, especially in ours. That's the contracts, the claiming, and then on the back end, the auditing. And so that's what we thought about when we were restructuring this team. And you could see that on the org chart, how we did that. I'm lucky enough to be fully staffed at this point. If you don't remember, we had another of my colleagues here, Tammy Smith. That was in late 2024. Since then, we've added 4 new staff onto the grants team. So all the stuff I'm going to talk about, we did while onboarding 4 new people. And they were also essential in allowing us to do all of this. We added 1 auditor since then, 2 contract managers, and 1 assistant grants manager. Again, I'll get into exactly what they all do, but it was a big year for the grants team. So now we have 13 total on the team, which helps with a lot of these processes. I'll start with the contracts team. As I said, kind of the first step in all of this. That is led now by Nate Baum, who's the director of contract development. He has 3 individuals that work for him on their contract managers. That's Wahid, Atahi, Coel Horton Pham, and Stephen Klein. And I'll be saying names because I do think it's very important to name the individuals on the team and the work that they do. They do everything from some contract development, even some of the work that the programmatic team does as far as evaluating proposals, negotiating with counties. They do a little of that and help me do some of that. They also do all of the processing after we get a budget negotiated. So they're moving it through the signature process. They're moving it through the oversight process. One thing we do now is they're nudging counties that don't sign immediately, which, yeah, sometimes happens. So they're doing that and they're keeping track of all that. They've made a lot of improvements in that process. One, they have more people to do it, which is great, but they've also really took to a contract tracking device, which tracks every single step of the process. So, within minutes, I can ask them how many contracts are pending to be signed by counties. They can get that for me. And also how long they've been pending. Tammy talked about this when she was here, but we used to track all this in 7 or 8 different places. They're now doing it in one place, so it's a lot easier for everyone to see and it's visible for everyone. They've also created a lot of different forms that make things easier. They're way more tech savvy than I am, and they can create, fillable forms that within a second can fill in all the county info to contracts and do that much more quickly. And so with that, I just wanted you to turn maybe to the next page and look at some of the numbers. The first chart here is the contracts numbers. And I think this helps really tell the story. So I did a 3-year look back, and you can see that contract actions, which includes new contracts, amendments, extensions, went up. 2024 was a banner year, I guess, for contract actions. But at the same time, our processing time has gone down. That first column includes from the moment we get a proposal from the county all the way till when we send a final contract to the county. So that includes a lot of negotiating. It includes waiting time for counties to send signed contracts back. So that can be a long time in that process. The next column is processing time from county signature to final contract. And that's where our team's pushing it through oversight, building the contracts, doing a lot of that stuff. You can see it went from 83 days in 2023 to 31 days in 2025. That 31 day also includes oversight approval, which usually takes 20 to 30 days. So our contracts team is getting contracts, the work they're doing is taking maybe a day or 2 to build a contract, build an expense statement, do all that and get it to a county. So I think that, I highlighted that because I think that's the most impressive number for the contracts team. And again, they've done a lot of that with the new tracking, improved templates. They've assigned tasks by expertise. So Stephen, who I mentioned, is really good at Excel, so he does expense statements. Wahid is really good at the contract building, and Coel is really good at our vendor responsibility, contract development, all of that stuff. So they've tried to push that to where people are experts. Next, I'll jump into the claims side of things, which is once you have an executed contract, the counties can start claiming. Tammy Smith, who you all met, supervises that team. She's the director of grants. She supervises 5 assistant grants managers. That's Lisa Coleman, Petros Papanikolaou, Amanda Goldfine, Kim Martell, Ying Lonergan Liu. And then we also have a couple that do double duty, so they may work, like Stephen is on the team but does a couple claims. And we have some auditors that do the same thing, and I'll talk about the auditors after this. The claims, the assistant grants managers, they are doing all of the payment related activity. It's essentially a mini audit of a claim. We're working on improving the efficiency of what counties submit, but they are looking at the backup document, they're looking at the expenses to make sure that they're proper and relate to the contract that they're supposed to. And they're also heavily involved in customer service because there are a lot of questions about claims. So they're a point person for counties to call and ask about any claiming related questions that may come up. So on the claiming side, if you want to go back to the numbers chart, I have some numbers to share there as well. So doing a 3-year look back, you'll see in the first total claims received, we've actually gone down a little bit, and I think part of that is the consolidation. But our total amount paid has increased significantly. Again, I think the consolidation is a piece of that. For average claim review times in days, that's gone down significantly. And that is from the moment we receive a claim to the moment that that person, the AGM1, is done reviewing that and it's okay to be sent for payment. That's gone down, I think my math here is 20 days in 2 years, from 23 to 25. The processing time, which is the time from receipt of that claim all the way to the time where a county actually gets paid, has gone down almost a month in those 2 years. So we can get payments to counties in a month less than we used to in 2023. There's many reasons for that. I think one of the reasons is we've assigned counties out. So every county has one person on the grants team. They become experts in those counties. They know what they're looking at. I think that's really important. We've issued clear guidance. When Tammy was here, she talked about our new cost manual. So we issued that to give counties and ILS more guidance on what is needed with claim. And just, better supervision, better training. I know Tammy meets one-on-one with her AGM1s, better communication across the teams. There's a lot of reasons for that decrease, and I give Tammy and her team all that credit to reduce that. Next, because I knew Chris was going to ask about ACP rate increase, we have a chart on that. We were only able to do a 2.5-year look back because it only started in 2024, but you can see we have an increase in claims there, an increase in amount paid, and a large drop in processing times. A lot of that credit goes to Kim Martell, who was one of the AGM1s on our team. She worked heavily with the counties to educate them on what we need when they submit those claims. And she has that really locked in, and any counties that weren't sure, she could talk to them and get that down. So you can see 3.4 days for her to review a claim, and then another maybe 25 days for that to get paid. That includes, sending it through our BSC, getting those paid. And part of that also I'll talk about later, but we've moved to an e-signing of claims. So instead of Patricia having to sign by hand, we can now email those to her and she can approve it electronically. And you'll see year to date, this chart was created at the end of May, I think May 28th. We're at almost 37 million already. So we're on track to get close to 80 million at least if that holds. And then I also wanted to highlight New York City because that was also such a jump. 6.5-year look back, and I think that's important because you'll see the first few years, they were submitting less than $1 million a year. We've worked very closely with Makje, the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice. Burton and Tammy have been working closely with them. We implemented kind of an expedited process for New York City where, they have many levels of review on their end of a claim. So by the time it gets to us, it's already been reviewed a couple times. So we can make those payments almost immediately and then review on the back end. I think that has really increased the amount of time it takes to review and gotten these payments out. And you can see the numbers have just skyrocketed that. I think this past week, Tammy submitted an additional 32 million claims. That's not included in this number. 4 claims for 32 million. So that is really increasing. So again, I think the reasons for the decrease on all of that, a lot of it is the assignment of counties, the clear guidance and the supervision on those teams. Next, I want to jump into audits, which is the final phase of a big grants team. Our goal is to ensure funding is dispersed in an efficient, timely, and fiscally sound manner. I think the first two things I talked about are the efficient and timely part of it, and the fiscally sound is the audit part. For that, we have Marion Bush, who's an auditor, and Tim Clark, who's our new auditor that joined us this past year. Marion had done this alone for the past few years with very little guidance. She also was managing a full claims workload. It was difficult to really develop this audit program that we envisioned with just one person in a full workload. We hired Tim in earliest part of 2025. He had a lot of expertise as an auditor. We made sure he came in with expertise creating these structures and processes, and he did just that. Within the first few months, he created a bunch of auditing documents that would help us, templates. He created a full comprehensive multi-year audit plan, of course, in partnership with Marion and myself. And so we were able to implement this audit plan that we've envisioned, which allows the AGM ones to have a little more comfort in the review process of claims, knowing that we're going to have a solid back-end audit. And so, a couple of things that were created was this cross-contract evaluation tool. So a lot of counties, and Chris, you may know, have positions that are funded under multiple contracts at ILS. Hopefully this won't be as much of an issue moving forward, but it is right now. And so this document tracks cross contracts. It can really help us spot where a county may accidentally claim on some of these. They're claiming at different times and different contracts, and that happens. And we have found that to happen. And then this multi-year plan, so we know we're going to go out to a county or two every month and review. So those are really our three main functions, teams within a team. I don't know if you guys have any questions on that. If not, I did want to talk about some projects that we're working on, but happy to take any questions before I jump into that.
Just one quick one, Jimmy.
Mm-hmm.
The cross-contract tracker.
Yeah.
Is that something that you share with the counties?
We have not yet. We've discussed maybe how that's something they could even fill in on their own at some point. Basically, what it's doing is taking, let's say it's a personnel position, the salary and fringe that they're claiming on that position for that quarter. We're tracking it all in one place, as opposed to 3 or 4 separate expense statements.
Completely acknowledging there may be stuff in there that you don't want to share with the counties, but if there was a way to have a safe way to share a subset of that information with the counties, I think it would be extremely helpful.
Yeah.
Like Burton's comment, I can't tell you how many times I've heard from people like, I went to law school because I was told there would be no math.
Yeah.
I tried to untangle the contracts at Washington County when I was working with you and Patricia. I felt like the neurotic detective with the string, right? Like I had all these things up on the wall. Literally, I had things pasted to the wall and I had lists underneath it of what was funded under which, when the distribution, I mean, it's
Yeah,
insanely
I
complicated.
feel like that every day.
Yeah, and our folks that are doing public defense in the trenches, that's not their wheelhouse.
Yeah.
So I think any tool that we can, the other thing I look at is when we have key staff turnover at the county.
Yeah.
Right, so like we've got one person in our finance department that like knows this stuff, but she's retired next year. And so kind of put it on the finance director, like, okay, try to download that from her brain and make sure that we've got this documented somewhere. But that transition always doesn't happen as smoothly as we would like it to. So if there was a way for us to partner with you guys to get a look at what you're tracking and make sure we're on the same page before we errantly put in a claim, that would be hugely helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, I think it's the county's data that they're giving us that we're entering, so I think that's possible. I will say our, I say AGM ones, the assistant grants managers are reviewing claims. They do a good job working with the counties to help them create spreadsheets. We've sent template spreadsheets that they can use to track their personnel across different contracts. So we are doing that kind of one-on-one ad hoc, but you're right, it would be a good opportunity to share.
If possible,
Some
something
of
I
that
think.
information.
Thank you.
So I remember from, maybe I misremember, but from several years ago, that the city had continually run like $100 million of unclaimed monies. What is the amount that sort of on a steady state basis that they're spending that they could claim? Do we know?
That they're spending that they could claim.
Yeah, well, there's a spending. What's their spend? Assuming they can claim all their spend.
That's a good question. I think they're spending almost everything that we budget.
I guess what I'm getting at is, so for 3 years, starting in '23, they were claiming about, all of a sudden, they were going from claiming $1 million to claiming $100 million.
Yeah.
Pretty big jump.
Yeah.
And annualizing the 136 is, 260 or something, more than that, 280. How much of that is they're claiming arrears?
Yeah.
And how much of it, once they've claimed all their arrears and they're claiming on a timely basis, which they hadn't been doing, what is it we would expect them to be claiming each year?
It's a good question, I think. I don't know if I have the,
So it's about 88 million, right? It's their statewide contract plus the,
Yeah, that's just statewide.
yeah, so it'd be, yes, and then we can get you
And then
that
the
number, but it would be about, and yeah, if you add the 47, yeah, it'd probably be about 150 million,
Close to 150. Yep.
yeah.
So they're going to catch up
Yeah.
pretty soon
Yes.
at this rate, okay.
think through all this work. Yeah, it is, and that's a good point. It is a lot of catching up, finishing statewide one claim. All right, so just a few things we're working on to kind of show all the improvements here. One is that cost manual I was talking about that we released in late 2023. I think that's been extremely helpful. But we have, heard from counties, we've heard from our internal ILS people that there's some inconsistencies or some places we could improve. So we have a working group led by Amanda Goldfein, working on improving what we need to collect from counties, hopefully reducing what we collect from counties, the structure and layout of the cost manual so it's more intuitive to read. We're hoping to do some webinars once we release that to help educate the counties. And so, that's a process that we're working on now and hope to have pretty soon. I would say maybe by the end of the year if possible, because I think that is such a good guide for counties. And as you mentioned, when there's turnover in a county, that's a way to really lay out what we need with a claim. And if we can make that readable, I think that's important. And then we have, this is going to sound a little outdated, but we have a grants unit shared drive. So what we did in the past is we had a grants unit folder that housed all the contracts. It housed all the expense statements, which was where we track what the counties have been spending on a internal drive that was only accessible by the grants team, Patricia Burton, and maybe one or two other people in the office. So none of the programmatic side of the office could see any of that information. If they wanted to know how much a county had been paid up to date, they'd have to ask us, we'd have to give it to them. We took an opportunity to use a Microsoft product that we all have and move our folders to SharePoint. When we did that, we also reorganized it by county as opposed to by contract, because everything we do at this point is by county. And we made it really user-friendly, so the most important information is up front. And I think this has been really helpful in our collaboration and communication throughout the office, because now everyone has access to that. You know, an attorney going to Washington County can look in that drive on their own and see what's been spent as of yesterday. And so it was actually a very big project to get all that moved over. It sounds, you know, old and this should have been done a long time ago, but I think that's made a huge difference in the way that the entire office can access our information. The other thing is the continued move to e-signing and e-submission. I think this is a huge improvement as well, which sounds like like a minimal thing, but when Tammy was here, she discussed how we moved to e-submission of claims. So counties now submit, I would say 98% of counties, 99 submit electronically now, as opposed to mailing us a hard copy of a claim. Saves paper, but saves time scanning and all of that. We recently moved to the e-signature of claims, which is also very helpful and can save about a week in processing times, because we don't need to wait for Patricia to be in the office. We were doing it once a week, every Thursday, and having her sign paper claims. And, you know, we moved to a much more simple process. I think it's been working pretty well. And again, it saves a week, and that's a week quicker for counties to get paid. And, you know, also with remote access, it just makes it easier and keeps the workflow going instead of having to wait a week. And then the last thing is the office professionalization and modernization grant. I think this is a really good example of how all the teams work together to get something out quickly. You guys approved this in your last year's allocation. It was for non-reoccurring expenses. It was something new for our office we had never done. Credit to Burton for looking into this and figuring out how to procure this. We issued it as a first come, first served basis. Again, this is unique to us. The RFA, which is the request for application, was released on February 2nd of this year. And within 4 months, we've already awarded the full $6 million. And we've already sent, I would say, 4 or 5 of the 8 contracts out to counties to sign. So for a completely new procurement, it involved Burton, it involved programmatic staff to figure out how to spend the money, and it involved our grants team to figure out how to get those to execution. And we did that in 4 months. So I think that's a good way to end and prove the efficiency of the grants unit and why I think we are the backbone. So,
Thank you.
yeah. Any questions on long-term ethics?
I'll just say too that, you know, as we talk about contract consolidation, Jamie, I think already touched on several things that the grants team has been able to start doing as a result of having fewer contracts and how it cuts down the processing time. As we continue to move towards it, I know that there are some other ideas for functions that we can start to take on, better synergy within our office, training opportunities for, you know, folks in the counties and so on. So there's going to be plenty of work for the grants unit to continue to do even after we achieve the dream of contract consolidation.
Right.
So there's also, you know, some of the contract consolidation means extending contracts for cost and then adding funding to contracts, which is also relatively new to what we've done at ILS. And I just sit and watch what the grants unit is doing, and it's just sort of these new things are happening seamlessly. And, you know, like, for example, Jamie's team sent templates to counties for a forecast contract extension. So all the counties had to do was look at it and say, this looks good to me, or we want to tweak it. And I was copied in on these emails, and it was just so nice to see, like, all the counties be like, yeah, nope, good to go. Like, it was happening just so quickly and seamlessly, but in a way that the counties feel that they're being well served, which I really appreciate. That work and that attitude of the grants unit. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Greg.
Thank you. Burton, office updates.
Yes, this will be quick. Since our last board meeting, we've had a couple BDAs approved, so staff will be coming on board with us. We actually have our newest ILS employee starting today up in Albany. Lee Strock is our newest Family Court Representation Counsel. We do have a candidate who will be starting with us soon as an administrative assistant with our research team. We'll talk more about them at our next meeting. And we have someone starting in August with our criminal defense representation team out in Western New York for Region G, which is Ontario County. So we'll have updates on that once that person's been able to start. We've got a pending BDA, so this is the hiring paperwork that's in process for a litigation resource attorney with our statewide appellate support center. That was backfilling a vacancy that we had. And we are currently in the process of coordinating interviews for a re-envisioned data and policy analyst with our research team. That is backfilling the position that Lucelle Chisonka, who is our operations development specialist, previously held with the research team. And then we are soon to be recruiting to backfill a criminal defense representation counsel for Region A, which is the New York City and Long Island region. Those are the updates.
Thank you. Unless there's anything else, I think we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.